the suspension of Senator Omo-Agege and the issues arising from there. Joining us right now is Mr. Tunji Abayomi, who is a legal practitioner. And we also have with us King Onoja, who is a legal practitioner as well. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on Sunrise Daily. It's particularly pleasant to see you here, Mr. Abayomi, all the way from Lagos, should we say? Yeah. Well, wondering, what do you make? I mean, when you heard of the suspension of Senator Omo-Agege, did it come to you as a surprise? Let me start with you, Mr. Onoja.
It didn't come, to be very honest, it didn't come as much as a surprise, to be very honest. The Senate has shown a penchant to implement a strict discipline. Right? It has shown a proclivity to implement a strict discipline. There's a desire to elevate, in my opinion, the nature and the cause of interaction. I use the word interaction loosely. Representation in terms of quality, in terms of the utterances, in terms of the dignity and the of the upper house. If we follow, there had been a few precedents set. There had been a particular precedent set with another senator, that almost followed exactly the same route. So it didn't really come as much of a surprise. The incidents that preceded that were a little bit surprising. The statements that were made by Senator Omo-Agege. First of all, he is recanting an apology. He is withdrawing those statements and apologizing. Then the institution of a suit, on account of the very statements for which he had apologized. It was all a little bit, what's the approbation and reprobation all about? Because it seemed a little unstable, But in terms of the suspension itself, I wouldn't say there was much of a surprise there. I won't go as far as saying I was expecting it, but I wouldn't say I was very surprised.
Mr. Bayomi, what do you say? He says it's not a surprise because the Senate seems to have a strict discipline. Some people are saying that it looks like the Senate doesn't tolerate dissent. Do you think it's discipline, or do you think it's a lack of tolerance on the part of the leadership of the Senate?
Well, if we begin from the standpoint that in a democracy everything is controlled by law, it becomes indiscipline if we act contrary to the provisions of law. There is no provision for suspension of a legislator. It must be understood that a legislator in a legislative house represents a constituency, not himself. And his act that is contrary to law, for example, in a criminal case, can only be subjected to the rule of law as provided by law. For example, in the case of criminal cases, you have to make a report to the police. But even the law is governed by law. In other words, for example, a law that is provided must be lawful. So in essence, what I'm saying is that if the National Assembly decides to take an action, the first question we must ask is it guided by law, either by the Constitution? Is there a provision in the Constitution that allows for it? To the best of my knowledge, there is none.
Yeah, but the Constitution makes provisions for lawmakers to make rules to guide themselves, doesn't it?
But not rules that is contrary to the Constitution. The rules, they are only able to do that because the Constitution empowers it. And we are now talking of rules of proceedings, not rules of suspension, because the important thing is when you suspend a legislator, you have actually denied representation for the people of his constituency. And that would be an organic violation of the right to participate in the democratic process. It is a fundamental issue that every citizen, through his representative, must or expected to participate
But there must be grounds upon which or under which, an erring lawmaker can be punished. For instance, not looking at this case in particular. Yes. Say it was something more criminal in nature, for instance. Yes. In that kind of instance, how does the National Assembly distance itself from that sort of lawmaker?
Well, there's no problem with that. The law has made provision for that. If the act of a legislator tends towards criminality, the law requires that a formal notice be given to the police. You must understand that the legislator is not empowered to go through the processes of investigation, prosecution, and sentence or judgment. The law has made all those provisions. Therefore, a legislator cannot say that, oh, because he has done something wrong. So in essence, what I'm saying is that one of the most fundamental issues that the national legislative houses must appreciate is that they have a greater duty to the enthronement of the rule of law according to how the law is established, not according to the morality of the leadership or even the perception of order or normality by the House of Assembly. They can only act according to law, the rules of law. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no provision, even in the rules of order of the legislative houses, that allows it to suspend its members. You cannot just do that, because in essence, what we are saying is that the constituency is suspended from participating in democratic process.
Barrister Onoja, by your submission, we understand that you're of the perspective that this measure taken against Senator Omo-Agege is about uplifting the standard of discourse and kind of consolidating on the notions of decorum within the National Assembly. I want to ask you, when you look at history and you look at some of the precedents that have been set in this 8th National Assembly, where you had, for example, Senator Dino Malai, attacking Senator Oluremi Tinubu, and there were lots of abuses there. We didn't see any kind of discipline meted out to Senator Malaya, who is a known loyalist of Senate President Saraki. Is there a double standard there, and is it not possible that politics is playing a role in some of these, the discipline that's being meted out?
Okay, first of all, I do agree with my very respected Mr. Abayomi that there's a jurisprudential conversation that ought to be had around whether or not the Senate, the legislature, whether the Senate, whether the state houses of assembly, whether the House of Representatives ought to be able to suspend or exact some sort of punishment over punishment, discipline, control. You can pick any of the words over members of that house. We need to ask ourselves the question, really, is there a need to shape, to put people into a particular path, having thought about it, that the legislature probably represents the conscience of the people? Are we supposed to be able to allow everybody come, an all-comers affair, where people, are permitted to participate in any nature of conduct, whether criminal or civil? There's a fundamental conversation there. For instance, are we saying that, because there's a right to representation, a member of the Senate can come into the floor of the plenary or into the hallowed chambers, right, naked, without clothing, for instance,